right, welcome to the sixth session of the IoT World's Manufacturing Day. I'm your host, Lucian Fogoros, and as we switch the conversation from extracting the value from manufacturing to extracting in a secure way, I'd like to just start with a couple of reminders. Your subject matter experts you see here on the screen, they are live, so as such, please make sure you ask the question. There's a Q&A option there on the right side of the screen. Please post the question there, and at the end of the presentation, we'll get them answered. Also, if you feel free to leverage the chat option, if you want to let us know what are the topics, who else should be invited to speak at our conferences, leverage the chat and let us know. If you see a comment you like, go ahead and post it on LinkedIn or X or your favorite social channel. With that, I'd like to invite to the stage Rod Luck, the Director of Product Management of OT at Fortinet, who will moderate this session. Rod, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lucian. And welcome to our panelists. So our session today is entitled From the Concrete to the Carpet, Assessing and Navigating OT Risk. And just as a background, what FortiGuard Labs, our research and threat intelligence arm, we regularly take the pulse of especially cybercrime activity around the world. And we do find that manufacturing remains a target of cyber criminals because the rate at which manufacturers pay to get operations back online is relatively high. So this is an ongoing concern. Cybersecurity for manufacturing is an ongoing concern. And we're going to talk today to one of our partners and a mutual customer about how they're tackling these challenges. So I'd like to introduce our panel, and then we'll get into some of the discussion. So first, we've got Carlos Buenano, CTO for OT at Armis. We've got Mike Ellers, Global Senior Security Manager at Olin Corp. And then also from Olin Corp, we have Stephen Beasley, who's a Cybersecurity Manager for Operational Technology. And so to kick things off, I think sort of, and Lucian reminded us, this is a live session. We see a lot of developments recently, especially in the United States for U.S. organizations with sort of shifting responsibilities at CISA, DHS, NSA. There was some drama around the CVE program and its funding a while ago. How are you staying abreast of OT cybersecurity risk? How are you tracking this today? And have you changed any of your habits, and data sources as some of that, as you see some of those changes in CISA? I'll start with Mike from Olin.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. It's a multifaceted and it's a daily and weekly approach, whether it's from the feeds from CISA, CISA or DHS, or I also have at our company, we get some internal feeds from an MSSP. Taking all those, you have to have at least one. At least a recommendation for anyone watching this, if you're not doing anything, certainly have a trusted feed. CISA is a great source. Most companies feed off of that. You're getting feeds from the government, things they have access to that the average person maybe will not see as early as they will. I've talked to those groups, they're seeing things earlier than most. So that's solely a recommended item. And so now you're getting vulnerability information. Now you're getting awareness of things hitting the ground daily. Beyond that, trying to stay abreast of what's happening in the OT cyber risk. It can be a combination of attending these conferences, talking to people on the grind. You have to stay up on those issues that are going on, and having a good network of people that you stay in communication with. It's staying out of a vacuum of your own vacuum. Making sure you have those good networking. If you don't have those, attending these folks, meeting people, reaching out afterwards, building that network over time along with these feeds. Those are some really good ways.
Got it. And Stephen, how have you, I guess you're at a sort of similar role, maybe a little closer to the ground. How have you kept on top of these things and built that network?
Yeah, all the things Mike said. And one of the things that I found very beneficial, specifically to call one group out, was a Chem ITC group. So Chem ITC, just recently I came back from Washington, D.C., where I was able to meet with CISA, FBI, a bunch of other manufacturing companies, major heavy hitters in the industry that all bring a lot to the table. So establishing the networks, like Mike just said, getting those connections. I have these people on my phone. I can go call them. Matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, one of the guys hit me up and called me and said, "Hey, I have a question about XYZ." And we share that information together, have those conversations, being able to share the feeds that we are personally using. A lot of times we reach out to your vendors like an Armis. They have an ear to the ground of what's happening out in the industry because of all the customers that they have interactions with. Leveraging your vendors to the fullest extent, it's right. You're not just buying product for them, you're buying information as well. Leverage them. Call your reps, call your Armis rep or whoever it is. Ask them, hey, who do you recommend? What information do you guys have that would help me be more successful, with your product, not just, implementation, but also, what's out there? What do I need to be aware of that you guys are seeing? Leverage them to the fullest extent because they're happy to help.
Awesome. And Carlos, I'm curious, I guess, for your view or maybe Armis's view or both. Hopefully those are a little bit aligned. But what are your view on these data sources? Are you seeing changes or concerns about the role of CISA and DHS, which it sounds like especially Olin has been relying on, and a lot of others I know as well?
Yeah, so we have seen a lot of movement in there, and especially at the beginning, a few weeks ago, where it was the talks that the NVD was actually going to cease, the way it's working. Obviously, that continued and it's all sorted. But in response to that, we decided to create our own vulnerability database that is actually available. We already been managing this database internally from our asset intelligence engine for quite a while now. So we have a complete set of these vulnerabilities. But on top of that, we want to go above and beyond and try to help the community, because at the end of the day, it's all about helping the community and providing an alternate source and advisory database that can actually help not only our customers but the community in general. And then we also developed, started with the acquisition of CTCI and early warnings database, which is we actually go beyond the vulnerabilities and try to understand what are the threats out there and what the bad actors are actually working on today. We actually have a few mechanisms and an AI to basically understand from a vulnerability perspective what is actually happening out there today. And of course, we actually introduce that technology into that vulnerability database. Again, it's all about keeping people informed and making sure that they understand the vulnerabilities out there. And of course, the last piece of how we're helping is sorry, I just lost my line of thought. Just 1 second. So we have our own Armis labs where we actually looking into investigating some of the vulnerabilities of the devices that we're managing today. So in conclusion, it's just we actually trying to help the community by providing another source that is going to be continued, maintained, and given any scenario which it could or could not happen, we are prepared for what is coming.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's been great to see a variety of organizations sort of step up when there was that concern over the NVD, sort of the legacy thing. I'm gonna shift a little bit here. So Fortinet does an annual survey that'll be of OT cybersecurity practitioners, and one of the trends we've seen over time has definitely been as the kind of awareness of OT risk increases in organizations, the responsibility for OT seems to have kind of moved up toward the C-suite over time, and there's a real trend of moving from just the plant manager or operations leader up to somebody who's under the CISO or to the CISO. So I guess the question for Mike is, what does that evolution look like at Olin, and how do you see responsibility for OT security sitting in your organization today?
Yeah, this is a great topic and probably one of the more challenging ones to continue implementing well at a company. Security is a partnership. I think everybody would agree that everyone has to contribute to cybersecurity. It's not just the cybersecurity team; it's the responsibility of everyone. Now, you get past that. It's certainly, there's a cultural dynamic between the IT and OT staffs and organizations, the way plant staff do things. If we're just all being candid, there's that they have a way of doing their things. IT has always been more business oriented. People on the OT side, they're worried about getting widgets made. That's what they should be worried about, right? They're building the products that the companies sell and making money on. That's what their focus is. They're not focused on cybersecurity because that's not where their mind is at. I have to make widgets. I have to make sure my machines are running. That's what they're focused on. They want to be secure, but there's only so many hours in the day for anyone. So as these recognitions get done, as cybersecurity continues to come to the forefront of everything, making sure the Purdue model is implemented. Let's say you have that. If you don't have that, you obviously want to get there. It's absolutely critical. The first step in securing anything on the manufacturing front. But where do you get those responsibilities? Where do those decisions that I just made even come from? OT management, again, that's not what their expertise is. They're making product. That's where their expertise is at, and righteously so. So you see this shift. I'm evidence of that. I've been on teams where this has happened, and it's a good thing. That shift is moving and continues to move and should move into an organization that is equipped to build strategy, implement strategy for both the IT and OT space. Just because it's on the other side of the firewall, assuming you even have Purdue implemented, the Purdue model implemented, again, separating OT from the IT networks, and it can be logical, by the way. That expertise is always going to be in the cybersecurity team. That's what they do for a living. That's what we do for a living, right? That expertise is going to be there. You can't implement it, though. You cannot move forward, though, without having that partnership on the OT space. You have to build those partnerships. And so the shift, in my opinion, and I've seen this in evidence, I've seen it work, let that strategy live with the information security team, the partnership with the OT team. That takes some effort, right? Having that communication, having open dialogue, making them aware of standards, building standards, something, and having their buy-in and understanding of those standards. Now you have them become a change agent, right? Get a change agent to help you deploy and make people aware of those standards. That's how security team, a global security team for a company, can be the right strategist, own that strategy, help implement that proper strategy, and be successful. So I think that's why it's shifting. It's where it should be, and I think that's the implementation path for a successful.
Yeah, and I don't see it going backward anytime soon either, right?
No.
Stephen, I'm curious have you seen this play out sort of in your scope, and what has helped you to have success so far?
Yeah, 100%, Mike. Building relationships. It starts there. You can't do anything without relationships. And one of the things I think, as you see this shift with responsibility sitting at the CISO level, I think that's absolutely 100% the right place for it, because the CISO can go talk with the rest of the C-suite, get buy-in from the business to go, create adequate resources for the OT. Because as cybersecurity gets put into the OT environment, right? As we have those conversations, we do asset discovery, vulnerability management, right? All the key things in IT that we're trying to leverage, those existing findings and best practices that we know about today into OT. There's going to be opportunities. We're going to find things. As you turn rocks over, you're going to find things, right? But for the OT environment, who traditionally operate at a very lean pace, right? Lean staff, lean technology. These guys are, making widgets, manufacturing billions of dollars worth of product with very little, if any, interaction from the corporate. All corporate cares is that they're making the widgets and they're making a lot of money with whatever that they are using this for, right? But then when you come in and try to mature their environment and shore it up from a cybersecurity perspective, it's going to take resources. It's going to take people, technology, redoing some of the processes. In order to do that, it takes funding. Someone's going to have to champion this at the C-suite level. So if the CISO can bring awareness to what they need to do at the OT sites, at the manufacturing level, the maturity that has to happen there, raise awareness with the rest of the C-suite, they can then provide adequate funding and resources and focus on leveraging what they already have at their disposal as far as funding the sites, and give them additional funding, additional resources, et cetera, to help them become compliant with all the policies that, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're trying to implement. So you have to have that, CISO awareness, right? Essentially, you're auditing the sites, but also bring awareness to the upper business at the C level to help them get the funding and resources that they need in order to become compliant.
Yeah, you're not gonna mature that architecture without any funding to actually make those changes. It goes without saying. Carlos, I'm curious what you've seen, in your current role or past roles related to. Have you seen this elevate over time from sort of the plant level up to a higher level in organizations?
Yeah, so I'm gonna speak, on putting my hat on like control systems engineering, and then look, working in the plant and working with my fellow control engineers and operators. Our role is basically, maintain operations alive, and we actually typically running around the plant, fixing issues and creating efficiency and most importantly, keeping people safe. Okay, so the days are not long enough, and then when a security team comes in and it starts to modify that dynamics that is already busy, there is a natural rejection to when it comes to implementing things that can potentially affect how the plant runs normally. In saying that, I have seen the shift, especially depending on the industry that you work on. For instance, if you work in oil and gas and mining, you'll see a very significant shift because, of course, putting people at risk is actually more important at the time. So we actually see the implementation of frameworks like ICC 443 to the design and implementation of networks. And when that time comes, then it's a collaboration across all the teams. And this is actually when I see the shift. Not only the OT team and the production team, but also the IT team and how we can collaborate together, in whatever way possible, design, the drawings, procurement, policies, more importantly, policies, to make that possible. Okay, so and then the safety part of our operations, we start implementing also the cybersecurity piece, because then that is becoming a new part of the safety, just to keep the plant also operationally resilient. And implementing all these, different methodology to protect, the plant, not only from an operational perspective, but also from a security perspective in and out of the network. So to answer the question, yes, I have seen these relationships getting stronger, and of course, the know-how is always going to be different. The know-how from an OT perspective, it stays in the OT team, but it's also shared with the IT team so that they can actually understand what the challenges we have, so that we can actually work together. And I give you an example, for us to actually implement a remediation, whether it's a patch for a Windows machine, we need to rely on vendors to qualify, that step of the process. So again, if we communicate that with the upper security chain, and they understand, they can actually work with us to create campaigns and compliance rules that are let us fix that in due time, and then create some mitigations in the meantime. So that's something that can be negotiated, and then we can agree on, and then everyone can meet the requirements.
Yeah, I think we'll talk a little bit more about sort of some of those big, I guess, challenges in how you operate in security in a sec. First, we're going to do our first poll. So our first poll is going to be on about cybersecurity strategy or responsibility for OT cybersecurity. So, and the question here is really about your operational cybersecurity. So, Is it owned by a committee? Is it owned by somebody in the C-suite? Is it owned by operational leaders? Does it vary by site or department? I know some companies can be a little bit heterogeneous, especially if you have global operations or regionalized. Number 5, you don't know who owns it. Hopefully you have some idea who owns the OT cyber free organization. We'll wait a few more seconds to see where things fall, and then take a look at where people are organizing this today. And okay, I think we can wrap up the poll and take a look at the first results here.
Looks like most people are seeing the shift to the CISO.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So a strong shift to the CISO. Still some operational leaders owning the cyber strategy, which I think was the traditional model, right? The plant network and its security were the responsibility of the plant manager, right? Because you are managing everything together. So moving on, I want to dig into that topic that Carlos started to touch on about what are some of the challenges of applying cybersecurity when you have standards that are coming down from IT, especially. So what are the relationship issues that can exist between IT and OT staff? How can you help address those? How can you ensure a solid security partnership? And I guess the question is, I'll start with Mike and just ask, from your perspective, how have you done this? How have you been able to be successful in this, or if you feel you've been successful, I hope, in this kind of security transformation?
Yeah, I've lived and breathed this in more than one case and in more than one company, and you have to really start out. You have to build a plan, but let's assume you have a plan. You understand what you want to implement. Let's get past that piece. Now you have to really understand there's a cultural difference between, I said this earlier, between an IT organization and the OT staff. It just, they sometimes come from different worlds. They have different experiences, and you have to recognize that. You can't go in with the bully pulpit or the hammer and just say thou shalt. That usually doesn't work so well. You want to build a partnership. The way to do that is you certainly need to have some top-down buy-in. I think Stephen alluded to that a little bit ago also. And then you need a change agent. It's absolutely critical. If you want to be successful, you want to go implement IT standards, security standards in the OT infrastructure. I'm saying I've lived and breathed this. I've seen what doesn't work well or makes for challenges, and I've seen what does work well. And that change agent, you get someone on the OT side that knows those people, right, and can be that liaison and help be in the room when you're giving the message that, by the way, we're about to go change your world a bit, which they probably don't have time for, right? They don't have time for that, but you're about to go make the world secure so they don't get hacked, so you don't have some big issue somewhere down the road, right? But you're about to change the world. You got to recognize that. That's what works. Now you get that change agent, you start shifting minds, and there's books written about this, right? How to have a change agent to influence change. So I've seen this work. I've had to implement it. It has been successful. It's always a little challenge up front because you're changing minds, right? Most people don't like change. It's just human nature. So once you get that, you start communicating and you show the value of that. There's always going to be some people that still don't want to buy in. Let's just be honest. There's going to be the naysayers. All I want to do is go be over here, right? But you got that change. You have to keep working. You have to keep pressing on. You have to work through those folks. That's why you need the top-down buy-in, right? And you have to have a good plan. It's all these little nuggets. But that change agent, I'm telling you, get your change agents. Get a plan. Get the change agent. Start there. You will see the success. Recognize there's cultural differences. Bully pulpit approach probably doesn't work real well.
Yeah,
I've seen that tried. Not successful. Carlos is laughing because he's probably seen it tried too.
And everyone on this webinar is benefiting from your experience and maybe your unsuccessful approach.
Yeah, luckily I had never tried that because I knew it wasn't going to work. But I've seen other people suggest it and they're trying. And I was like, guys, that's not the right approach.
Yeah. So. And Stephen, I'm curious, how do you have a perspective on how to get buy-in at the site level and how to get them to understand the cybersecurity risk?
Yeah, a lot of times if you can tie cybersecurity to safety, that helps significantly because OT traditionally has understood safety as that's usually safety's number one, right? We want everyone to come into work, do their job, and go home the same way they came in. Help them understand that if there's a cybersecurity event within the plant, it could be equal to, if not greater than, a valve, having some sort of mishap and spewing thousands of gallons of chemicals, or having an explosion or something, because having a threat actor inside the environment is just as bad as having someone who's not authorized to be on the site walking around, right? So helping them tie security to safety helps kind of bridge that gap. They understand safety. Secondly is, as Mike alluded to, have that ambassador, have someone who understands that and then propagates that. As an IT cybersecurity practitioner, I've been doing this for over 20 years. So I remember back 20 years ago when we started telling people, okay, you can't have local admin rights. We're going to start filtering your traffic to the internet. We're going to start taking away USB. And you remember the conversations you had around that for just, your average business user. Now multiply that times 100 with someone in the OT environment who's used to owning and operating everything, and they've built this thing from the ground up. And now you're telling them they can't do it the way they've always traditionally wanted to do it. That's a much more difficult conversation to have. So going in with a little bit of empathy, knowing that you're going to come in and ask them to change something that they've probably maybe over the last 30 years built from the ground up and are very much proud of doing. You have to approach it from, I'm asking you, if we do this a certain way, it's better for you from a safety perspective, right? You find those common grounds, find the conversations, and have it, when you start talking about, I've noticed when I've had these conversations in an OT environment, and you start talking about and leveraging or using traditional IT cybersecurity lingo, they're like, I don't understand what you're saying, right? Like, so maybe change the way you traditionally speak about cybersecurity. Don't use a bunch of acronyms that aren't relevant to them. Learn their systems, learn, their vendors that maybe you've never heard of, Emerson Delta V or Siemens or whatever, right? Go learn that stuff, learn what those systems do, and then talk their language, and you start developing a rapport with them, and they start listening to you more, because the only way you're going to get them on your side is if they truly become an ambassador. Like Mike said, find those people who are willing to connect with you and basically tout your story. Be the cybersecurity evangelist for you at the site. But in order to do that, you have to build that relationship.
Yeah, totally agree. And I agree on the terminology thing. I mean, you see even, competing terminologies when you get to a PLC and something's called a download versus an upload.
Yeah, exactly.
Just understanding their world and their view of the systems. And Carlos is laughing because he's obviously been a controls engineer as well.
Not my world.
Yeah. So Carlos, any other perspective from you on
yes, I agree completely with the forum. So from a control system perspective, it's exactly that, talking the right language. But what I wanted to add is also, if you can provide a functionality that is also going to benefit operational resilience, things like, hey, what else? Like, okay, if I allow you to bring this tool into my system, I know you're going to benefit, but how do I benefit? So what is the benefit that I'm going to get in my operations using this tool? And if it's zero, then it's like, well, why am I going to get that effort? But if it's, hey, with this, we're going to provide you with an up-to-date inventory of devices. For instance, your CMDB is going to automatically update. We're going to be looking at your obsolescence devices, or devices that actually reach obsolescence. You want to help you through, process integrity. We want to help you manage when someone is actually making changes to your PLCs.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to help you measure your gaps when it comes to implementing some of the deployments that you actually need into your operations. So then you actually start getting the attention, and this is actually what I have been doing. I've been in the room with the plant managers, and simple things. Hey, how do you manage your IP addresses today? simple like that. It's like, well, we have a spreadsheet, or sometimes we have issues because, someone used one IP address and didn't forget to actually update the spreadsheet, and then the next person came to implement something, and then he couldn't use that IP address because it was clashing. Just simple things. It's like, well, what if I told you that I can actually give you a tool that not only gives you the information of when was the last time that a device was installed, but also what IP address was used, and you can actually use that as your reference point, like the source of truth. Things like that, that add value to their operations when they need to actually, do something. You're always going to take their attention.
Yeah, so you're giving, I mean, it's kind of giving them a bonus on the operations side, and not just saying like, hey, we're going to add this, even if it's like a low touch solution, we're going to add this, and it has no other benefits for you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just for us. I mean, some solutions are going to be like that. Like if you're taking away, if you're adding some controls on the endpoints, potentially it's going to increase friction while somebody does their job. There are cases where that has to happen for security. I'm curious. So kind of a related question, but for somebody who might be coming from the IT side in a manufacturing or an OT organization, or you've been a CISO in IT, what kind of adjustments do you have to make to support the OT security teams in your environment? And we'll start with Mike again.
I think on the IT side, recognizing what a good cyber platform looks like. What is your cybersecurity framework, right? This is where I would come from. If it works on the IT, there's odds a lot of this is going to work on the OT side, but in a different flavor. So again, I think having the cybersecurity framework written down, planned out, what are you going to do? And again, it's going to be a little different on the OT side than you're going to have on the IT side. I'm not going to be having internet reaching out, so you have to build your plan to where that you have tools and processes in play that don't require the internet to be successful. How are you going to do that? There's ways to do that. You can push from the OT side to the IT side, but again, I think the best way to be successful here. We've talked about the buying agent, having those relationships, but now you get down to brass tacks. How can I be successful? Some other forums that I've talked about this on. The biggest piece and takeaway in the limited time we have here today is really having that framework built out, understanding what success looks like. I have AV on the IT side. Do I need antivirus on the OT side? Probably, but you're not going to be able to get updates every day, right? Maybe update a client once a year instead of, I don't know, if you're using certain clients shouldn't require, the days of having DAP files, for instance, those are gone, right? You shouldn't be having tools that need that. There's better tools out there today on those fronts. And equally on other pieces, your network visibility, you're going to want to have a tool that's going to not require something to go penetrate a switch port all the time to get data, right? You want more passive capabilities on the OT side so you don't take production down, right? So have tools that are going to do that. These are the considerations, those are the things you have to have. That framework, again, whether it's the NIST / framework with CIS controls, that can be applied, has been applied. I've used it. I've seen it applied, done that. You just got to flavor it a little bit for the OT side. You have to recognize that. Got it.
Yeah. Stephen, any thoughts on that? On, which IT practices you maybe need to adapt, or which ones you've had to adapt as you've implemented the program?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Mike, you got to have a plan, right? But as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan, so you get punched in the face, right? So you come from IT, and we patch every 30, 60, 90 days based off of criticality. You take that over to OT, they're going to laugh in your face. Like, this machine goes down every 3 years for maintenance. That's when you can patch, right? So you still have patching cycles. They just don't look like IT, right? You still have monitoring. It just doesn't look like IT. You still have all those aspects, like you said, the frameworks. You still have those. They just, as you said, Mike, it's a different flavor, and you have to expect that, and you have to adjust. Because if you don't adjust and you go in, like you said, bully pulpit, mandating how it's done, you're going to be met with a brick wall. So you have to kind of go in and adjust your expectations a little bit, and still have the patching, still have the monitoring, but have tool. And only if there was a tool that did passive monitoring that would get you a lot of really great data. Do we know anything like that, Carlos? Is there
I don't know what you're talking about, Steven. What kind of tool does that?
Yeah.
I don't know. But if you could have a tool like that, that would be fantastic.
This is Carlos guy I met once.
I don't know. Carlos, do you have any recommendations?
Actually, one thing that some customers have done that made the difference is to nominate a person within the OT environment that understand the two worlds, IT and OT, but mostly is actually in the OT, and bring it to the team. Be part of the core team of security, so that everything that we have been speaking about, the whole terminology, the understanding the processes, the understanding the challenges when it comes to understanding the equipment and the nonsense of the equipment maintenance and patching and updating and so forth. So bring that person from operations and be part of the champion team to implement that security the security program. That has been really, really successful for some of our customers, because it basically closes the loop between IT and IT understanding the OT requirements, and of course then you have an ambassador from the security team talking to the OT team in their own language, and passing through those those IT requirements from a security perspective, yet understanding what methodologies can be taken in place to achieve them in the OT environment. That's actually it has been a key part of these customers deploying that security program.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like, especially like having that person who's a little bit immersed, has the security background, but is immersed in the OT constraints.
Correct.
Then you can kind of understand, okay, we need to achieve these things, but because we are not going to patch every 30 to 60 days. I mean, I don't think any IT person wants to be the one who signed off on that, turning that on an OT. If you're going to be patching every 3 years, okay, what are your mitigations going to be, right? And what other compensating? Is it, visibility? Are you going to restrict? Are you going to
We're going to create an exception.
Communications.
Patching 3 years. How do I know? What can I set up to remind me in 3 years? Hey, you still have this that hasn't been addressed. How are you going to address it now that 3 years has passed?
And how do you reduce that attack surface around it?
Yeah, there's a good point Carlos just mentioned, and it can't be lost. If there's a security parameter, I've been asked this question a number of times over the years. I think Carlos and I were on a panel one time and we got asked this. We both kind of blurted out the same answer almost simultaneously. It's like, if someone's not going to do something right, and we know it's the right thing to do, but you can't. Maybe you can't change a password for 10 years. Okay, because the system just never goes down. If you bring it down, you lose $1 million an hour. Come up with whatever scenario you want. But if your cadence is you got to change the password at some point, once a year, once every 3 years, but you got those exceptions. They're going to come up. Make sure you have a security exception or acceptance process. You cannot be and your team and sit and accept that risk. Because when something blows smoke, they're going to come back to that role and they're going to go, why did you let that happen? Why did you put that? Why did you allow that to sit like that? So have that documented, that it's not about not about just shifting blame, but it's about the business understanding the cyber risks involved with these of doing business, and they have to buy into that risk and own it. It is the business risk. It's not a GIS risk. It's a business risk, and they've got to own that. And you do that through that security exception or acceptance with an A, where it's not, acceptance is you're not going to go resolve in 12 months, right? Like an exception, you might. So very important.
Yeah, and documentation is key. Just justifications. Understanding. going like looking ahead of, okay, so and I call it exception because it's like acceptance sometimes indicates, okay, I already dealt with it, so I know I can't do anything, and I'm not gonna do anything anymore, and that's it. That's why I call it exception, because exception is like, okay, I dealt with it just now, but it's gonna hit me again. It's like acknowledging an alert, and it's recurrent. It will come back in whatever you set it up to come back with, and then and the documentation is key. The justification, the people who is actually looking at, hang on, what happened with this? Why didn't we deal with this the specific findings, vulnerabilities at the time? Okay, so we are waiting for the next shutdown. Maybe it doesn't. You can actually address in the next shutdown because the project manager is already full with so many activities that you won't be able to fit it in, or it needs equipment to do some other testing. So okay, well, let's just do 3 years, and then in 3 years' time, we have mechanisms to basically remind us that we haven't dealt with it.
Yep. I want to move forward to a different topic now, and just step back to kind of looking at your OT cybersecurity program overall. What do you consider to be some of the most important security controls you're going to have in your environment? And I'll start with, I think I'll start with Mike here.
Well, I know Stephen and I and Carlos have all had conversations on this, so I'll hit a few salient ones. I know Stephen's going to want to hit some other ones also, and continuing. I'll mention the Purdue model. Okay, I think it's the most important one. I think everybody on the panel here would agree that there's lots of considerations, but I'm going to hit that one. You have to have in order to protect the operational technology environment, the OT, the production environment, whatever your company's calling it, where you're making your widgets. You do not want that thing connecting out to the internet. You want separation from the business network. Now, you can have logical connection. You got to be able to push your data so you can see metrics of what's going on in the OT environment on the business network. So you can have that logical separation. But that Purdue model, if you're not familiar with it, certainly look it up, become really familiar with it. It's all about, I think there's 5 different levels in there, but it's really about, I'm going to talk about the middle piece of it, right? It's really about separating the OT/production environment from the business network. And that's the biggest thing. We've talked about having a framework, right? You certainly want to start there. And we talked about a plan. And again, looking at NIST 853 and seeing those controls, and having CIS controls as your considerations, and those things, right? All very important. But do not forget Purdue. It is your bread and butter. And your lifesaver, because if something goes bad on the business network, you don't want that leaking down into your OT network, and you do not want to allow things. I'll say one more thing, and I'll hand it off to Stephen, because I know he's probably burning to add a number of items in here. But I think our biggest thing in Purdue is we don't allow the business network to initiate into your OT network, right? You can push from the higher security boundary, which is your production network, into your lower security boundary, which is your business network. Yeah. If you don't take anything out of else today, remember, I would take those nuggets.
Right. So segment IT from OT. Great first step. And honestly, Fortinet as a firewall vendor, we see a lot of customers taking that first step in their sites, and especially in manufacturing. So certainly it's still something that needs to be addressed. Stephen, what other control beyond segmenting IT from OT? Again, it's a great thing to take away. What do you like to do beyond that?
Yeah, so if you're responsible for protecting something, you have to know what it is you're protecting, right? And you have to also have to know the criticality of each and every asset that you're protecting, so you can put some level of priority around protecting those things. So asset visibility and inventory, I would say, are probably next on the list, because say you want to have a vulnerability and patch management process. Okay, what do you go patch first? What do you put as a high vulnerability versus a low vulnerability? The only way to know that is to know what your assets are, to know what those are, have an inventory, right? And a lot of times in the OT environment, Inventory is either this guy that's worked there for 45 years and it's a list in his head, or it's a spreadsheet. It's written on a legal pad somewhere in an office, right? It could be anywhere. And then so on top of that, how do you know what comes in? And in an OT environment, a lot of times it's static. There's not a lot of new equipment in there. There's not a lot of funding available for that equipment. But also, I want to know if somebody brings in a Nintendo Switch and connects it to the network at the OT environment because some guy wants to play, with his Nintendo Switch while he's, working on some. I don't know, right? I need to know these things, right? And in the OT environment, we don't have things like NAC or some other type of tool to control those things. So getting visibility into what's happening in the environment, I think, is the next step from a critical perspective.
Okay.
And again, if only there was a tool that could do that, Carlos.
Carlos, it's great to hear you call out segmentation, which FortiGates are great for, and asset inventory and vulnerability and patch management, which Armis covers quite well. Just Carlos, from your perspective, how do you recommend people sort of start their program and then evolve their OT security program?
Well, the first thing is that you have to do something. Okay, let's see. That's the first step. Okay, get your head out of the sand. Don't ignore it. Because that's the first step. I agree with Mike. And I tell you my story. Like when I was actually working in energy company. So my task was just to design a control network. And that control network basically had 60,000 devices, and we had to build it from scratch. And it needed to be secure. It needed to actually have all these, recommendations and requirements. So for us was just to decide, what framework we needed to use, and not necessarily that we had to meet the requirements from a compliance perspective. It's like, for us was more about, so what can we follow that is going to take us by the hand and then reach all these items that we discussed, especially Stephen, everything, the visibility, the authentication, the network segmentation. And when it comes to network segmentation, how do we segment the network? What do we use? Do we use Purview model? Do we use something else? So how do we even, create the zones and the conduits, that is going to allow us to actually create that network segmentation? What firewall are we going to use to actually help us automate? Because we have 20 facilities, which has, X amount of devices each. We had 60,000 wells that is going to communicate from a public network into the private network, and making sure that is actually protected. So we follow the framework just to actually help us design and then decide, what mechanism. In the first step, the very first step that we actually implemented, even though it's foundational requirement number 5 in the Purview model, was actually network segmentation. How do we create network segmentation strategies to separate, the wells from the gas plants, from the water treatment facilities and beyond? Separate, how every vendor will actually access different part of the plants, the Rockwells, the Siemens, the Yokogawa, the Honeywell. So how do we actually segment, secure remote access? How do we allow people to remotely connect to us to actually give us some diagnostics and help us develop some of the things without having to bring people from Germany into Australia at the time. So the whole point is just to have a format that helps you, or a framework that helps you throughout that security program that you are developing. And you'll see that, you follow those, and then slowly you're getting mature into the different items within that framework. And of course, then, give you that, operational resilience that you're looking for.
Just a quick last point. Oh, go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, jump in.
And I just want to add one more thing. It's like, at the moment, thinking about that, So we are actually partnering with Fortinet, and we actually created all these different integrations just to help the customer at the end to make that transition easier. And that's actually the key part of it. So you have a security program, but you also have, partnership between the vendors, in this particular case, Armis and Fortinet, to help you, deploy and implement all the security policies a lot easier. And that's the last thing that I wanted to add.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, Rod, real quick, is that Carlos mentioned the framework. We mentioned on the IT side, a lot of people live by the NIST cybersecurity framework with CIS controls. On the OT side, a good place to start is with NIST 8183. If this helps anyone, if you're trying to find the right thing to look for, and then the more in-depth approaches, I believe it's NIST 882. So those are good places to start if you have not started anywhere.
Yeah.
All right. Now, sort of jumping off from this discussion of how to structure your program and where to start in the maturity, we're going to go to our second poll, which is just on turn the mirror back on the audience a little bit and ask you where you're at in your OT security posture, where you think you're at, relative to some of these basic capabilities and then some of the more advanced capabilities that we talked about. So I think, let's see if Paul's launched it or if I can launch the poll. All right, here we go. So the question here is, how would you characterize the maturity of your OT security posture? So the first is you have no segmentation or visibility in place for OT. As somebody who talks to Fortinet customers pretty regularly, I still occasionally talk to somebody who does have no segmentation in place in their OT environment. So even with that heavy selection bias for firewall customers. The second is that you have visibility and segmentation. So you have some way of collecting information on what's on your network, and you've been able to segment IT from OT, potentially made a little OT DMZ or segmented some of your east-west traffic. Third is that you have some access controls. You have some profiling of what people are doing across those barriers. Fourth is some predictive behavioral capability. And then fifth is that you're leveraging orchestration and automation. Usually that means you've got either playbooks or you're wired into an OT SOC or a converged SOC security operations center to process alerts from the OT environment. So we'll give it a couple more seconds and then take a look at the results here. So let's have a look at where people are ranking themselves on the maturity scale. So pretty evenly across the first few levels, and it's there are some people still, and I've talked to people where they've said we view our for our site we've decided that we're accepting the risk of not having IT segment from OT. Definitely not the recommendation once you start going down this path of adding security to your program. And then pretty evenly across the next couple of levels, we're getting into a level of having especially access controls on third-party access. We didn't get too much into that, but that's another thing that people have that's really kind of evolved over the last few years. I think we have a few more minutes, so maybe just some closing thoughts, and then we'll check. We've got a couple things in the Q&A we can address. So I just want to start maybe with Carlos this time for a change, but what are one or two things a manufacturer can do right now in their current program to protect their industrial control environment?
Yeah, I mean, just address low-hanging fruits. Okay, so the easiest thing that you can actually do is basically validate the state of your network. Even though you can actually have a flat network and maybe not connected to the IT network, but gain that visibility, understand that whether or not that happens, and when you do get that visibility and you understand the different attack path or possible attack path that whether it's directly from the internet or coming from the IT networks or any communication that you have in and out of the network, isolate it. You don't have to segment the whole network, but you can actually just get to a point where you understand what your business impact or critical assets are within your operation, and then isolate them, protect them, not within each other, but between all the outside networks. And that's actually the first step. Visibility, understanding how this device is connected, and then isolate just to make sure that isolate as much as possible. I understand that you might need some data coming in and out, but make sure that you put the policies in place to understand who reaches out into your OT network and who actually communicates out from the OT network out. So that's the first step that I would actually recommend.
And I'll go to Stephen next. Stephen, what do you think? If you could give people a couple things to do right now, where would you tell them to focus their efforts?
I know Mike really hit earlier hard on the Purdue model. That's, if you're not segmented, segment. I mean, that's one of the low hanging fruit. I would say that's it's a high impact with relatively low disruption, because chances are the OT environment doesn't have a lot of need to have access to IT's business systems, right? I shouldn't have an operator checking email from the same machine that is programming, a device, right? That just it's bad practice, right?
Amen.
So that's a high impact, right? Because most of ransomware, most viruses, a lot of it comes in through email. I want to keep that off my operation systems, right? So just segmentation. The other thing is just I keep stressing it, having that visibility, knowing what's out there, knowing what's in your environment, because I can't protect what I can't see, right? That's another, I would say, a high impact, low disruption. As you asked about tools, right? Leveraging an ARMIS tool, leveraging something like that to see what's out there. Again, I got to be able to understand what's out there in order to protect it. So those two environments, right? Or those two, I should say, tasks: protect it, isolate it, and then understand what is there.
Got it. And Mike, the last word for you
Yeah.
in terms of your basic recommendations. Hopefully something slightly different.
Yeah, excellent things Carlos and Stephen already said, so it's hard to top those. The only thing I would add is the one thing I said already: make sure you're not allowing, if you have the segmentation in place, which it seemed like with our poll a lot of people do not allow the business network to initiate, keyword there, initiate through your firewalls into the OT environment. That's just that just opens up holes you don't want to allow. With that said, there's an understanding you need to have remote control or remote access, let's say, from the business network into the OT environment. So the other nugget is, when you absolutely need that piece of, people are working from home, they're not going to have necessarily everybody at 3 a.m. at the plant that you might need in an emergency issue. You may need to have this capability, right? To have remote control it or remote access into the OT environment. You can set that up. There are good tools out there to do that, but you want to obviously come in at your perimeter. You're going to VPN in there. You have stoppage there. Then you're going to have another set of 2FA, right? 2FA on that piece. You have another set of 2FA that's going to allow you through the what we like to call the ICS or OT cluster of firewalls that's separating internally your business from the OT network. Have another process that allows you to go from that area into the OT network. You got a double set of 2FAs in place, good protection. To beat that takes some doing.
Got it. So like a modern secure mode access is the next thing on people's list, it sounds like. All right. Yeah. I want to thank everyone. It looks like, unfortunately, we've run out of time for our Q&A. So I want to thank everybody for attending our session, and enjoy the rest of the IoT World Manufacturing Day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.